when they signed Saquon Barkley, a lot of people were really excited about it, right? I'm going to bring this full circle. When they signed Saquon Barkley, a lot of people were excited about it, and me personally, I said to myself, "Okay, all right, it's cool, it's a sexy signing, but I would have
Sexy.
loved."
That's why people are excited. It's a skill position player.
Exactly. And the first thing I said to myself was, I kind of wish they would have put that money towards the linebacker room at some point, or just somewhere in that defense to fortify it. So, to that point, the Saquon Barkley signing was a deviation from their mantra. Do you see them making any more deviations from their norm throughout this offseason?
Um, no. Um, they only deviate for what they call, and how we use this word with Saquon, special. He used that word. They think he's special, and that's why they deviated. I often talk about, you're going to hear a lot of leading up to this draft that the Eagles haven't drafted a corner in the first round since Lito Shepherd. You're going to hear that a lot. And I hate those types of stories from this perspective. They would have drafted a cornerback. They wanted to draft a cornerback in 2010. They wanted to draft J.C. Horn. They wanted to draft Patrick Surtain. They couldn't. And you know from working with me all the time, 2017, they wanted to draft Christian McCaffrey. In a lot of ways, he's been their white whale since that moment.
No pun intended.
Yeah, yeah, couldn't get it done. Um, you know, so there's other teams involved. The Eagles are going into this draft, and they'll have a cloud of prospects they feel comfortable with at 22. And if they're forced to take one, they'll take one. Um, recent history says Howie will go up to get the player he wants, or the last sort of player in that cloud if it starts to evaporate pretty quickly. Um, and I think that's going to be either Terry and Arnold, a couple Alabama guys, and J.C. Latham, one of those two. Those would be the targeted trade ups to me. Um, and if they're not there, you have to go in a different direction. But you're at the mercy of other people when you're at 22. The only team that can sit there comfortable now as we speak is the Chicago Bears. They know they're getting Caleb Williams. Everybody else, and then Washington is pretty comfortable because they know Chicago's taking Caleb Williams. So they can, whether they want Drake May or Jaden Daniels, they're pretty comfortable. And then the uncertainty starts to build as you go down the board. When you're 22, you're at the mercy of a lot of people and a lot of curveballs. And you have to have multiple avenues you can go. But they haven't taken a a cornerback since Lito Shepherd doesn't mean a damn thing because they wanted Derek Stingley the year after that. Weren't able to get him. So, you know, take that stuff with a grain of salt, other than running back and all ball linebacker. But if they think somebody is special, and they thought that with McCaffrey, they think that with Barkley, linebacker that hasn't manifested itself over the years. Even at those positions, they would make an exception, but you have to be special.
Staying on the draft, John, we talk about scenarios where they may trade up for a particular player. You mentioned Terry and Arnold. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, they're in a situation where they can't move up, or there's not a deal that can be made for them to move up to get the player that they're sorting after. At the 22 spot, which prospects do you believe fit nicely with what the Philadelphia Eagles are trying to do? And just to take it a step further, what do you think should be their priority at that spot if they have to stay there?
Um, I think it matches up with their, we all know their foundational thought processes, and they like to build up front. And the deepest position in this draft is tackle in the first round by far. Um, and they will get a good player at tackle. And, it's not a major need because Lane's still playing, Jordan Mailata. But, when you start reaching for lesser players because you don't have a need, that's when you start making mistakes. So if they're forced to stay at 22, I think it will be offensive linemen. But then you'd prefer a guy who can start at right guard and then kick out to right tackle when Lane retires. Those guys are probably going to be gone. The Lathams, it would probably be the best suited to do that, and that's why I think the Eagles might move up to get him. But if you're stuck and you have to take Amarius Mims or Tyler Guyton, I would do it rather than reach for the third best corner who isn't as good. That I think is a mistake written all over it, especially in this defense where it's so dependent on communication and young players. And you saw it last year with lesser younger players, but Eli Ricks and Kaylee Ringo. How many communication issues did you see? This is a really complicated scheme for young defensive backs. And now it gets even more complicated with the actual, Vic Fangio is the original. He's not the cover band. So, the complicated aspect isn't going away. So if you're sitting there wishing for Cooper DeJean or Nate Wiggins or somebody like that, just understand there's going to be a lot of hiccups in that rookie year.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people feel like, and me included, just full transparency, because I feel like the Philadelphia Eagles have to continue to fortify that defensive core. And get more talent on that side of the ball. And because the offense is so locked and loaded, I guess the natural mindset would be, well, these first 3 picks in the draft got to be defense, right?
No. In fact, I guarantee one of those first 3 picks, if they take them, and again, Howie could use one of them to move up. I guarantee they will come out of the first 2 days of the draft with an offensive lineman. I guarantee it. Because of the depth at the position. And they're not going to go into something and say, all right, we need, and obviously they have much more talent on offense than defense, but that's where you make mistakes. Need is the worst talent evaluator in sports. I say it all the time. Brian Billick told me, he's not the first. Many people have said that over the year. Need is the worst talent evaluator in sports. In other words, when you start reaching for need, you're done. You're cooked. Nobody's ever gone bankrupt drafting good players. You draft good players and you figure it out. And that's the way every team should go about it. Too many teams get caught up in, I need a all-ball linebacker. I need a cornerback. I need a safety. I'm going to take the best safety on the board, even though I have an offensive lineman who's much better on the board. That's a bad way to do business.
Well, John, I got to ask you, right? First, second, third round. Okay, you probably want to get the first. You probably want to get the best player available. But at what point does need take precedent, or is there at any point in the draft where need takes precedence over best available?
No.
Mm.
No. There really is never an instance. Now, if it's close and you have somebody slightly, then you can start arguing. But if it's not close, no, there's never a good reason. Never. Zero. There are certain positions you might go into, like the Eagles this year. They're not drafting a quarterback. And maybe at 22, Bo Nix is the best player on your board, and you're not going to draft Bo Nix, so something like that could happen. But you've kind of written off those guys before the process even started, so he's not going to be on the Eagles board of targeted players anyway. But when it comes down to that group that you've targeted, and for those who don't know, the average NFL draft board, like you'll see things, you can go on some of the sites and 400 players, but there's no NFL team in the world that has 400 players on their draft board. They've been whittled down. The smallest I've ever heard of was Bill Belichick had it whittled down to 75 players one year, 75 draftable players. Most have it about 2 to 250 at the high end. And that's your world. And Howie was asked the question in his pre-draft availability: is this a deep draft or a not deep draft? Most people don't think it's a deep draft because day 3 is going to be a little bit weaker than it typically is, lack of underclassmen. And Howie just said, tell me who's there. It might be a deep draft for us. It might be a non-deep draft for somebody else. Once you get to mid-second day, I think you're going to see a lot of boards that are way different, because teams are evaluating different things. They want different things. But on your particular board as an NFL team, there's never a reason to say, I'm going to take this kid because I need a cornerback. And I'm really deep at defensive tackle. The Eagles are, even after losing Fletcher Cox, are pretty deep at defensive tackle. But if they have a defensive tackle they love, they will take a defensive tackle.
Has there been situations, and you've covered this team for the past several years? I think you started covering this team in the Doug Peterson era, right?
Yeah,
So,
first year.
so, and during that time, Howie was the main decision maker, and we've spoken a lot about precedent, and we've spoken a lot about prioritizing talent over need. Just if you can think back, were there situations where you said to yourself, wow, Philadelphia Eagles, that was a clear reach. They focused on need too much and didn't focus more so on the talent of the player. Do you have any players in mind where they blatantly just focus too much on the need side instead of focusing on the talent side?
Well, there's always hindsight, and obviously people are go to Jalen Reagor first, and understandably so, because Justin Jefferson was there and went right after him, and that became a point fingers type thing in the Novacare complex. The scouting staff supposedly wanted to take Justin Jefferson, and the coaching staff supposedly wanted Jalen Reagor. So they kind of threw the coaches under the bus on that one. Is it true? I think it was partially true. The Eagles got enamored with they wanted to stretch the field horizontally and vertically like Tyreek Hill did, which I kind of chuckle at thinking about it, because it ended up. But, even that in hindsight, people say, oh, how could you take Jalen Reagor? The Saints were going to take him 2 picks later, whatever it was. I mean, it wasn't like the Eagles were crazy to take Jalen Reagor. A lot of teams thought he was a potential big-time player. And a lot of teams thought Justin Jefferson was strictly a slot receiver, which is the reason he won 22. So it wasn't like Justin Jefferson in hindsight should have been a top 5 pick. A lot of teams screwed the pooch on that, and forgot for whatever reason, because his final year at LSU, he played in the slot because they had Jamar Chase as well. But the year prior, he played outside and he was phenomenal. And people kind of forgot that. And he turned into what he turned into. It's interesting that the year it hurt the Eagles going talent over need was the year prior and Andre Dillard, because they didn't think there was any way that Andre Dillard was going to be in the conversation at wherever the Eagles started. They traded up to get him because he kept falling down the board, and they said, this kid should have been a top 10 pick.
Yeah,
and
they drafted him at 22, at the 22 spot.
Yeah, and they traded up to 22 to get him. They traded up over Houston because they knew Houston was going to take a tackle, and Houston panicked when Andre Dillard came off the board. And it turned out to be a mistake, and he never developed into the player the Eagles hoped. But there was an indication that they said, all right, this is a top 10 talent. We have a chance to get him at this point in the draft, and they made the move. Doesn't always work out, but nobody's got 100% batting average, 1,000% batting average in draft picks. So all those people that like to point out the misses, everybody's got them. But if you stick to your philosophy and, talent over need that we're talking about, you're going to have your batting average is going to be much better than if you start saying in any particular year, I need this, I need that, and I'm going to go into the draft with a list. I need to come out with a cornerback in round 1, a linebacker in round 2. You're gonna have a bad batting average.